Good morning. Good morning. How is everyone doing today?
Good morning. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us, everyone. Good to see everybody connected this morning. Go ahead and let us know where you're joining us from in the chat. We have a great speaker with us today, and I'm sure she would love to know what parish you're from and perhaps to share one thing you hope to take away from today. So as you're getting ready, go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat box. And throughout the day today, we will have an opportunity for interaction and for questions. So please feel free to use that during these 2 days that we will be together. And again, we are just so blessed to have this opportunity to gather today and tomorrow for this 2-day workshop on the topic of every family is unique, some have greater needs. And with that, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce to you our speaker. Today, joining us, we have Charleen Katra. She assumed the position of Executive Director of NCPD in December of 2019, after having served on NCPD's Board of Directors in 2018 and 2019. She previously served as an Associate Director in the office. Oops, I'm going to ask people to please put their microphones on mute. In the Office for Evangelization and Catechesis for the Archdiocese of Galveston, Houston. For over 20 years, her primary responsibility was directing the ministry with persons with disabilities. Charleen is the co-author of The Adaptive Teacher, Faith-Based Strategies to Reach and Teach Learners with Disabilities through Loyola Press, and the author of How to Talk to Children About People with Disabilities through 23rd Publications. Charleen has extensive experience in systematic and sacramental catechesis and has served as a national consultant, author, and speaker on the topic of inclusion for various Catholic publishers. Charleen is currently a member of the Loyola Press Speaker Corps, and she holds a bachelor's in special elementary education and a master's in pastoral studies. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over now to our speaker today, Charleen. Good morning, Charleen.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for the invitation to be with you today. I'm excited to do so. As Marioli was just explaining to you, this has been my passion for quite a while. And so again, it's a privilege to be with you and share a little bit of some of the lessons I've learned along the way and answer any questions you might have. And luckily, we have 2 days together. So that's even a blessing, in my opinion, because the more time I have with people, the more we both learn, honestly. But let us get started, as always, of course, with an opening prayer. No, said I was. There we go. Sorry about that. And we've brought a prayer with us, so I will gladly lead this prayer, but I will put it up on the screen as well. And let us begin, as always, in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Spirit of God, present among us, you grace us with abilities that we freely share, in hopes of building up your kingdom on earth. All ministry, the disability ministry, is your ministry. We thank you and praise you for every opportunity to serve your people, especially those very beloved by you. Persons sometimes overlooked or invisible in the world. We ask for your blessings and guidance on our humble efforts to accompany persons with disabilities and their families within the full life of the Church. Thank you for ministry leaders who, through their sincere love and acceptance of the entire body of Christ, are transforming the world we live in, one diocese, one parish, one family at a time. May the blessing of God be upon us, giving us knowledge to guide us, courage to support us, and always love to unite us. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, now and forever. Amen. And before I start completely, I'm going to add one other thing to my introduction. And that is because I'm speaking to catechetical leaders, I want you to know that you may have a catechist in front of you right now that may have this position, my position someday. Because as God works in our lives in the most mysterious ways, I was a catechist at my parish. Actually, before I was invited to be the catechist at my parish, it was a very astute catechetical leader that just knew I had a background in special education. I wasn't using that degree at that time, but she knew it. And when the first family presented themselves at our parish back in Houston, which is where I spent a lot of my adult years, she came to me. Their family presented a child who had Down syndrome. And so my friend, the leader, came to me and just asked me, I, again, was not yet a catechist. I was overseeing the early childhood programming at that time. So I was already overseeing that. So, and she knew this about me. So she asked if I would teach Brandon. Well, I was happy to do so. But I have always jokingly said afterwards, it was like peanut butter and chocolate going together, right? I couldn't have dreamt it up, but yet it was a happy accident. I was a cradle Catholic. I had a special ed degree. And I swear to you to this day, I don't think I would have ever on my own thought of putting the two together. But for me, it was a very natural fit. And again, lo and behold, look where it led me now to lead this national office. In a million years, I couldn't have dreamt it. So on the way as I was driving here today, even to my office, I was thinking, I need to share that story because, again, it could be a catechist you know right now that will eventually end up in this position someday because I won't be here forever, right? So with that said, let's look at this first slide. The first slide, of course, is, Jesus washing the feet, which is such a beautiful story for us of a discipleship ministry service that we aim so hard every day to do our best at, to replicate what has been taught to us by the Master Catechist. And the one thing I always note on this picture in particular is I put up there, gospel values always equal full inclusion, right? So when people say, well, can it be a separate class or can it do it? Does it have to? Does everybody have to be together? And all the variations, and there are many, because it's just like every family having greater needs or different needs, no two parishes are alike either. But the really simple answer is always that gospel values equal full inclusion. And the other comment I make on this picture, so you remember this, is that whenever there's a scripture verse where Jesus is there with us in that scripture, there's always a social and a spiritual dimension, okay? Again, and that's note to self. There's always a social and a spiritual dimension of any interactions he has with his people. So we should, of course, aim for the same. And I know we're together for quite a while today. I'm going to interject something in a minute. This is just a cute little cartoon that I always use. And, sometimes in our humanity, we think we know who we should serve, right? But God knows best who he wants us to serve. So whoever God puts in front of us, and especially with the disability ministry, I highlight that the person who might look the least like us, act the least like us, talk, walk, etc. Doesn't matter what the difference is. God knows, and God puts the people in front of us he wants us to serve. And just like the little cartoon says, surely you don't mean surely. And, my husband belongs to the Knights of Columbus. One time he came home one year from a meeting and he was like, kind of, upset about this person and that person. And I said to him simply, if the Catholic Church is the universal church, we have to accept that if the welcome mat is that big that everyone is welcome, which is what we say and believe, then we have to embrace all the differences, if they don't think or act or work the way we do. So again, taking again God's lead. So the person who looks very different to us. And I'm going to say this probably throughout. The mantra is be curious, not judgmental. Okay. So for what we don't know, we should be curious. We should ask questions, be a critical thinker. but don't be a judger, you know, right? Don't be judgmental. Sometimes, again, humanity, our brain goes that way first. We have to work to keep it on the right path, right? And I'll tell you lastly, on this little cartoon, one time I used it in a presentation. At a break, a mother came up to me in tears because she said, and I never noticed it before, the bottom in the corner, the artist, I guess, who drew the little cartoon of the sheep, his name is Denton. She came up to me in tears afterwards. She said, "That's my child, and his name is Denton." And so it touched her more than normal just because of that situation or circumstance on the cartoon. All right, I'm going to go through a brief history because if you don't know this, it's important that you at least know the pillars or the foundations. You know, we started out talking about scripture, right? Scripture and Genesis 1:27, if I didn't mention that earlier. Those are our two bookends, so to speak, for how we serve in this ministry, in all ministries, but it's even more so in this ministry. So it's about the, you know, made in God's image, Genesis 1:27, and it's about especially the first social justice teaching for Catholics of our innate human dignity by virtue of being made in God's image. So we have those two as our, you know, scripture and tradition. Now we want to know what the bishops have spoken to about this ministry. And our history is this. In 1978, they wrote the pastoral statement for persons with disabilities. So this was their very first, and honestly, their only pastoral statement. I say it's their only because it was called the pastoral statement, but there is one more I'm going to show you about in a moment. But this little document issued a challenge, and the challenge that it issued was that the doors of the church be open to all, okay? But I'm going to stretch you a little bit more because it was really a twofold challenge. It said the doors of the church needed to be opened, but guess what else? The hearts of the people inside the church needed to also be opened. So, and therein lies a harder nut to crack, so to speak, a little bit. So we're going to talk about that more and more throughout our time together. But what was happening back in the 70s and 80s, when they wrote this initial document, young couples would bring a child to be baptized to the church like most Catholic families would do. They would have their child baptized. And what do we do when many of us have, you know, obviously observed and been at celebrations, baptismal celebrations? They ask the community to stand behind this family and to affirm that we are going to journey with them, okay? And we know right now, especially Pope Francis, he talks almost endlessly about accompaniment, encounter and accompaniment with our families and individuals. So we say at someone's baptism that we were going to do that as a faith community. But what was happening back in the day was as families who had that child baptized would come back for other sacraments of initiation, in particular Eucharist and, of course, confirmation, they were often turned away. Now, I always say to people, check someone's motives. Because in this case and in those years, let's say back in the 70s and 80s, a lot of what wasn't happening, probably the motivation of and oftentimes it came from a priest. We didn't have as many lay people in ministry as we do today back then. So whether it was clergy or others, they would say things like, your child doesn't need that sacrament, especially mainly Eucharist. Your child doesn't need that. They're an angel. They're going straight to heaven, like not to worry about it. Now, again, I don't think their motivation was to do harm, but as you can imagine, and I'm suspecting statistically, some of you in our audience and with me today are a parent or a grandparent or a godparent, etc., aunt, uncle, brother, sister. You know and love someone already with a disability. Statistically, it's very, very common to know that of my audiences. So since that really wasn't their intent, but anyone, why do you think, and again, you can always unmute if you need to ask a question or you want to respond to something, so I don't feel like I'm just talking to myself, even though I know I'm not. Why do you think they would say that to someone? Or another reason, again, the motivation was not to do harm, I don't believe. So we have to kind of have a little bit of compassion in that regard towards those days when those things were said. But we know it didn't feel good to the family. What might be another reason why they would say that in the 80s? Any guess? And I'll try and keep an eye on the chat too if you want to even put things in there. I think it might have just been because guess what? We didn't have many resources or trainings like this back then. So if you didn't have the tools, it was the only answer you really, and maybe that was the most pastoral thing to say, was it was okay, they didn't need it. Again, with the best of intent. But the families and the nationally have continued to say, you know, this isn't right, this isn't right. And in fact, they were right, it wasn't right. So in 1995, months later, the bishops wrote their second document for this ministry, the Guidelines for the Celebration of the Sacraments with Persons with Disabilities. That's quite a long title. So this is what came out in 1995 that really tried to dispel any of the myths about what to do or not do. Basically, it was saying, yes, this is a baptismal rite to be prepared and to celebrate your sacraments, and that they wanted the churches to do this. Now, again, it was still 95. We still didn't have too many resources yet, so it was just kind of pushing the envelope. And just so you know, this document, thankfully, the bishops, the U.S. bishops unanimously approved a revision of it that updated it in just 2017. So, and we're going to talk more about sacraments and all those specifics tomorrow. So stay tuned for that for tomorrow. But it did bring some newer things into feeding tubes, celiac disease, Alzheimer's even is now mentioned in here, which those things really weren't on the radar of the church so much in the 90s as they are today. So as I kind of alluded to a moment ago, every Catholic has 3 baptismal rites. Now, I don't know if you ever heard this, but you need to just be aware as a leader. 3 baptismal rites: to be educated in your faith, to be prepared and have the opportunity to celebrate sacraments, and to respond to God's call. So those are your 3 baptismal rites. And as leaders, we have a lot to do in making sure that those are affirmed, especially for our Catholic families. Now, speaking of disability, it's important that we talk about language. What is the best language? Trying to keep my eye over here, make sure nobody's saying something to me in the chat as well. Speaking of disability, and we actually have a document coming out soon. It's called Speaking of Disability, right? Pastoral Guidelines on Language in English and in Spanish. I don't know if we've debuted this publicly too much yet, but you'll be hearing more about it, and it will be available basically for purchase soon. But I'm going to talk to you about some of what's in that document. So when we talk about disability, words matter, right? So we want to make sure, again, as leadership, that we are using the most sensitive, appropriate language. A person with a disability, and more importantly, their family and caregivers or guardians, by the way we speak about the community or about their loved one, they will have a sense probably of our knowledge level, okay? So that's why I want to help you a little bit with this today so that you are, I guess, being your best pastoral self is the way I would say it. So now I do want you to kind of talk to me on chat or out loud. I want to hear any words or phrases that you've ever heard, seen, read that tell you someone's talking about someone with a disability. You could have heard it on the playground as a child. You could have heard it in a movie yesterday, you know, and it doesn't necessarily have to be nice, so to speak. What are those words or phrases that tell you they mean somebody with a disability by what they're saying? Good, I see a lot of things coming in. Special, retarded, the big R word. There's national campaigns to stop people from using that word. It's so offensive. They don't sin, someone said. They are special. Special needs is very common. Slow, short bus, yes, that's a common one. They ride the short bus. Those kind of phrases are obviously negative, a little off. People are still putting things in. Good. There are so many, right? Exceptional, behind, different. I'm just reading from the chat on my other screen, so sorry if I look sideways. Yes. Crippled, someone put, excellent. And I say excellent because that's really an older term. Mentally challenged. So handicapped, still dated, but more current. And the reason I'm saying it's good that all of those words that you're putting up there are being said is because I want to talk about how language in this community has changed over the years. And then we have not like us, blind, deaf, and mute. Let me show you my next screen and tell you a little brief story. This is the story of Vince. Now, that's not Vince, but he looks a lot like the guy I met years ago named Vince. And Vince also had no forearms. His situation was this. When I met him one night, I walked into a national conference for disability ministry, and he was telling his story. He was on a panel with several other people. Each person had a different diagnosis or disability. His obviously was a physical disability. And in his story, he was explaining, I met him, he was probably about 45 or 50 years old, but in his story, he had been injured when he was in his early to mid-20s. So, 25 years before I met him. In his telling of his story, he was he was a supervisor at a machine shop, and an employee who was using a machine, this is a terrible story, sorry, but that was using a machine that cut steel, said the machine was malfunctioning. So he went to his supervisor, of course, which was Vince. And so as the supervisor, Vince went back to the machine to check it because of the report. Unfortunately, obviously, the machine did malfunction again, and that is how Vince, in his 20s, lost his 2 forearms. Now, he's telling the story 25 years later, and in his telling of the story, he referred to himself, and I don't think I saw anyone put this word up there. Can anyone think of a word before all those words in the chat? It's even earlier, if you can believe it, than what we saw up there. Starts with a G. Any guesses? Speaking of G's. Got it, GIMP. Thank you. Is that Joseph? Okay, GIMP was the word he used to refer to himself. Well, it about made the hair on the back of my neck stand up for me because I was like, wow. I knew I would never call him that, of course. So the next day, I had the opportunity to sit just beside him in a small group session, and afterwards we stayed and chatted. I said that to Vince. I said, I heard you say that, and I know I would never refer to you as that. But I respect, and what I say to you is you never tell someone else how to self-identify. That's very important, again, about the dignity of the person. But what he explained to me, and I share with you, is about every 5 years since he was injured, that word, that vernacular has changed. So it went from GIMP, 5 years later, it was crippled. 5 years later, it was handicapped. 5 years later, and let's say 5 years ago, what was the most common one you still hear that was probably the switch about 5 years ago? Most commonly right now. Now somebody said special. Starts with D. Anybody got it? Exactly. Thank you. It looks like, can't see, it's Bellin. Disabled? Correct. So disabled is where he was at probably at the time I met him, which was probably 5 years ago. So you see how that language in every field will change. And it kept changing. Again, hopefully a little less offensive sounding, for the better. And now today, what we lean into today is called person first or people first language, where we exactly how it describes it. We always put a descriptor or a diagnosis of someone after them. So Charlene has a diagnosis of autism. Charlene has no forearms, but you're not going to put a descriptor or a diagnosis in front of my name, or use my name if you have it. If not, a girl or a boy, or a man or a woman. So, that's the way you have to think of it. And again, this comes, I say again, out of the dignity of the person. So Vince was a person who, he had a physical disability. Vince had no forearms, is his situation, but he had a physical disability. He was not disabled. And the reason I'm going to tell you the story of the traffic is you're San Diego, and I bet you have some traffic like I came out of in Houston and I've landed in DC, right? Lots of people, lots of traffic. So what do we typically do before we go out and venture onto the road? We listen to a traffic report. Why? Because they may say, there's a disabled vehicle on, and I don't know your freeways, but any major freeway in your area, say it, that name in your mind. So when you hear a disabled vehicle in that context, what does it tell you about your travels or about that part of the road? Okay, there's a delay in that area. Exactly. Traffic jam. What about the disabled vehicle? Okay, so things are going to be slow. It's going to take forever. Inconvenience. Are you going to go that way, or are you going to probably try and figure out a different route? Okay, you're probably going to try and find a different way to go because of all those situations. That car is, broken down, not working. Now, that's fine for an inanimate object. I don't have any problem with the traffic report saying there's a disabled vehicle on a freeway. I do have a problem with someone referring to a human being as disabled when I think of what it connotates. So, again, I just encourage you to always put the description after. Vince has cerebral palsy. Vince has autism. But it's always after the person. Okay, we want to always put a person first. So that's why it's called people first or person first language. And again, it represents more respectful, accurate communication, and it acknowledges, most importantly, that people are not their diagnosis or disability. No, they have hopes and dreams and a full life just like everyone, because God ordained that. Okay, another little thing you can do in the chat for me, if you will, a couple of disability IQ questions we'll have along the way. How many children have a diagnosis of autism? What do you think is the current statistic? 1 in 54, 1 in 88, or 1 in 34? Now, as you can imagine, since I started in this ministry 20 years ago, that number has fluctuated sadly too often because of the increase of the diagnosis. So take a moment and just put some answers in there. Okay, I see some A, B's, and C's. I see a little bit of everything up here, which is very typical. It's hard to sometimes take a good guess, but we want you to learn about this. Current as of, and I just checked the CDC recently, last week ago, A. So anybody that got A got it right. 1 in 54. 1 in 54. I can remember it being at 1 in 110, seemingly not that long ago. So you see how much smaller the group of people are that are having that diagnosis now. Typically, it's more common in boys than girls for some reason. That seems to be part of what we know. This person that I put on the screen, probably the most internationally known self-advocate for someone with autism, who is Dr. Temple Grandin. A couple good things that I put up here, some of her quotes. I love the one about being a visual thinker. Very important for those of us who work in the field of education, even Catholic education and religious education. I'm a visual thinker, not language-based. So she's not going to be someone who's going to want to read from a book, or it's just not going to appeal. And I love that my brain is like Google Images. If that's not an image in itself of how things go in her brain and how she sees the world and experiences the world. Very much visual learners, right? So we have to have a lot of visuals when we teach someone with autism. And then I love this other phrase or quote from her. I can remember the frustration of not being able to talk. So when she was younger, she had not acquired, I guess, the language that she has been able to now. And that can go different ways for someone. And we say on the spectrum, right? Because it's a range. I knew what I wanted to say, but I couldn't get the words out. Now, if you can't get words out, or you don't know words yet, even haven't learned them, even if maybe you have a developmental delay, again, not there yet, she would what? Scream. Scream is a sign of frustration. Okay, that was the only thing she could do to communicate at that time. So that's, again, also very important for us to know as catechetical leaders and educators, catechists. I put these pictures up just to kind of bring this message home. You can look at every one or any one of those pictures, and you almost can guess or imagine what might be being said. And if nothing else, you see communication, because all behavior is communication. And that's what we always say. All behavior is communication. So even for the person who does not speak out loud, doesn't communicate verbally like I am right now, that little girl on the right, you don't think her parent or her guardian and or I hope her catechist, etc., know what she's trying to say? Maybe she's proud of the picture she just painted. I don't know, we can't see what she's pointing at. Or maybe she's, it's in her way to tell a joke. And again, the parent or therapist with the young boy in the bottom, and the one in the top with those using sign language. So communication happens in so many forms. And we even know statistically, they say so much of what we say is really expressed in body language without us even saying words, facial expression, etc., right? So just keep all that in in your mind and heart, because just because someone can't say something back to you verbally, like an answer to a question, in faith formation or something, doesn't mean they're not receiving and understanding it. They just might not be able to give it back to you, at least not in the way you're used to. Maybe you need to let them draw a picture to express themselves, or be a role playing and just being, acting something out. There's so many other ways we can be more creative. Again, just a little bit more on autism. Again, as I mentioned, it's a spectrum disorder. There used to be a word that was used medically called Asperger's. Please know that that word has been put to bed, so to speak, or sleep. They're not using that word anymore. It used to kind of indicate someone on the higher end of the spectrum, sometimes very intellectually brilliant, even though they may have lacked some social skills, which is usually more their weaknesses. But they did take that away out of the medical directory years ago, recent years. So now it's just called autism, and that's why they refer to it an autism, being on the autism spectrum, because you can be at a very high functioning, so to speak, or a lower functioning, and so there's just such a variety. So that, again, the adage goes, no two people, if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. Okay, they're all they have some commonalities, but there's a lot of individuality in there as well, which is no different than the rest of us. Again, I often sometimes joke my next book, I'm going to title it, There's a Speck of Spectrum in All of Us, because I really do think that there is. We all have our idiosyncrasies, and we all do things a little differently, and that's okay. So here are just some really tips, strategies-wise. For working with people with autism, they love routine. And honestly, when I think of church, and especially Mass, the way things are always done the same, I can travel the world and I go into Mass, even if I don't know the language, and I know it's going to unfold in the same steps, the same format. This is very good. That's why some of kids with autism can be excellent servers at Mass. They can be very good assistants for class, because if you tell them to do it in this way and at this time, or if they know it's supposed to be that way, they will correct you and bring you back, on task, because that's their strength almost, maybe to like an obsessive compulsive almost point, but very much they like the routine. They also live, though, and that routine allows them to feel less anxious. That's why I always tell people, make sure you have an agenda, and tell your catechist, put an agenda in print, write it on a board, or even now virtually, make sure it's posted on a Zoom call, because some people need that. That helps them know what's coming next, and that gives them, I won't say it gives them peace totally, but it lowers some of their anxiety. And a lot of people with autism live daily with a very high level of anxiety, higher than you and I probably would maybe ever experience. So we have to understand that about them, so that we can be proactive to help them really not melt down. Because if we don't respond to their situation, how they're experiencing the world, that's where it'll end up. So we want to learn these things so we can see that behavior, even when it's not spoken, to indicate maybe someone's needing a break. Again, if we're calm, they're calm. Obviously, one begets the other as much as possible. So that modeling is always important, be it parent or leader. Use words and pictures. I always stress this one. It's very important and I'm going to talk a little bit more about it in a minute. Remember what I talked about in Temple Grandin, visual learners, okay? The second to last bullet, extremely important. Need twice as much time to do half as much work. That's big, folks. So need twice as much time. So if everybody else, is going to do something in 10 minutes, you need to give one or two people maybe 20 minutes. Or if they have 5 questions or 4 questions to answer, only give some people 2 if that's all they can do in the same amount of time. One way or the other, adjust for them. These are all some of the adaptations you can make or modifications to their schedule. Again, they may have some awkward, unusual social behaviors. That's not their strength. We have to really help them with this so that they, and I say protect them from being bullied. That's something we can do for them is, and we're going to talk about many things that can set them up for being more socially appropriate so that they're not bullied. And again, for someone who can't speak out loud, I was just talking to a priest yesterday, teaching someone that prayer hands means amen, so that when they receive Eucharist or when they're confirmed, we'll talk about this again tomorrow, that can be a way, it's a nonverbal way for someone to say amen. In a situation where in church we usually expect to hear someone say amen out loud. And then I want to talk to you just for a minute too about the benefits of using visuals with visual learners. Visuals are permanent, okay? Our words just disappear in thin air. They help prepare for transition, so we can tell someone we're going to sing or music next and have a little, the music symbol or the prayer hands, and it's time to, maybe sit in a circle and we're going to hear scripture. So they help prepare for transitions. They allow time for language processing. So when we say something and they can also see it, it gives them, when our voices disappear, our words disappear, they still have that to be focusing on and kind of trying to catch up with what everyone else already heard and, basically has moved on. They may not move on that quickly in their grasp of what's being said to them. Someone can see what you mean, which is also helpful for some persons. They're transferable, so you can actually, they could be something in a live setting where they could take it with them. So they can carry it with them. They can go with the learner. I love this one. They're neutral. There's no mood or no attitude about them, right? So no raised eyebrows when you're kind of surprised at someone's behavior or, upset or anything like that. No eye rolls. There's no attitude or anything emotion that goes with them. So that also is neutralizing, lowers anxieties. It builds independence, which we always want. Again, it reduces anxiety, and it really helps all learners, okay? Questions, comments, anything at this point? Feel free if you do.
Yes, I love the topic, and I know for me, being a wrestling coach, I dealt with a lot of young children that participated in wrestling and amazing gifts. I used a lot of, like for two takedown, I'd use my hands for two, one for single takedowns. It was just a pleasure to work with the children, and they felt a part of the team. They did very well. I had young boys with no hand, and I had some boys with no foot. And what an amazing, it had the other kids just do even better because they were like, wow, if he or she can do that, I can do it. It inspired them. It inspired us as coaches.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I
Just
love
thought I'd
that,
share
Thomas.
that.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for sharing that. So very true. Yeah, I say it, you'll hear me probably many times, but and I said to that priest last night, last thing I said to the priest I was talking to is, we need them more than they need us. Thanks. Okay, this slide just says, okay, there's barriers at every campus. It's just life, and in the world, but no different in our faith community and our campuses. So physical or attitudinal barriers, right? So we have our physical barriers sometimes, especially older churches. The newer ones, yes, the ADA came along in 1990. And by the way, the bishops wrote this pastoral statement in 1978, I told you, 12 years before the ADA, basically saying the same thing for the church that the ADA said in 1990 for, federal law. So they were very astute in writing that. Our job now is to keep working like this, to learn more about it and implement it. But so the ADA helps with some of the newer church constructions and property renovations. But our older ones, they're going to have these realities. Can we build a ramp, or can we, make a restroom accessible that's not? Yes, sure we can. But and I often joke about, what's happening here? Why am I not going? All right. I've lost bear with me. Not going to there she is. Thanks. I think I changed between one form of moving my screen than the other. So is it physical barriers or an attitudinal barrier that's in front of you, when you think of your own campuses? And again, I always say the physical barriers really are easier to remove than the attitudinal barriers. And unfortunately that still remains true. So that's important because we can do something about that, I think, as well. So on that note, and I'm a very positive thinker. So years ago, I took the ADHD and the ADD, which does mean attention deficit disorder and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And I changed what those letters stood for, so to speak. So now I have attitudes determine differences and assuring different habits develop. because I thought if we just look at, that's the problem with labels sometimes. They wrap someone in a label and then we don't think any further past it. So I think it's important to either try to get outside of using labels, except for there is a need for a label or a diagnosis, I should say, in the sense of a label, sometimes because it's like a passport for services. It's got its place for that. But as far as us, again, dignity of the person, all of that, how we perceive someone, kind of like the words we use, it matters because we will receive them and serve them differently if we see that what they're doing often is not willful. They may not be able to do something someone else is able to do yet, or they haven't been taught a strategy or skill or given a tool to help them, okay? So that's our job, is to learn more about different behaviors, kind of what's some of the motivation, what's the motivation? The boy on the right, that wants to use his fists instead of words, that child, there's an adage that says, hurt people hurt people. So maybe if he's being violent or bullying others or things like that, you've got to figure out if there's anger. Anger's always motivated by a hurt or a fear. That's important to remember. And you can think about your own self. Anger is always motivated by a hurt or a fear. So if you have someone that's exhibiting a symptom, so to speak, of expressing anger in whatever form of violence, okay, is it a hurt or is it a fear? Because once you can figure out which it is, maybe they are hurt. Maybe they have been bullied. Maybe there's other things we need to, peel back that onion. As much as we can peel back an onion to figure out why someone's acting out in whatever way that is, we're much more able to help them move beyond that and heal and, again, have a more fruitful life, a full life that is not going to cause them to end up incarcerated someday or some other worst case scenario. So, again, it's helpful for us to learn. Typically, again, and now they've also collapsed these two old terminologies, these two diagnoses into one. I think now they're just typically, you'll hear ADHD these days. So they kind of just have them in the one, so to speak, label. But it is some of your, the distracted child, the daydreaming child, the one who basically will say, I can't or I won't a lot, they're kind of trying to avoid a situation. But again, why are they trying to avoid it? Maybe the I can't do something is the lead on my pencil is broken. And we're only supposed to go sharpen our pencils at 10 o'clock, and mine broke at 9. You have to ask the questions and be patient and wait for the answers to find out why someone's trying to avoid a situation. So again, be curious, not judgmental. I put this one up here, and you may have seen it before, right? So here's our good St. Anthony saying to us, seriously, you lost them again? When was the last time you couldn't find your car keys, your eyeglasses, your notebook, et cetera, et cetera? Sometimes we expect things out of youth or young adults and, young people that we haven't exactly mastered ourselves. And we have to be honest about that and say, and because folks, this is really about executive function. Executive function skills, and that could be a whole nother session someday, it is really about a lot of the 8 basic skills your brain is learning mostly from birth to 5 years old. So early childhood, which I love that I have that in my back pocket still as far as a lot of knowledge, early childhood is so critical in forming people that can have successful lives as adults in work, in ministry, in relationships, in communities, life, because these are a lot of skills, relationship skills, organization, flexibility, anger management, all these kind of things that we're really learning, often by what's modeled to us as a young child. Now, there's a couple other bursts of brain development in our life. Usually teenage years is a big one. And then, of course, don't give up hope. For those of you who still have teenagers, there's another big burst usually in your mid to late 20s for those, with young adult children. It doesn't mean we stop after that. We still, today, I'm always still trying to, learn some skills better, to procrastinate less, or whatever my own weaknesses are. We all have strengths and weaknesses. But just to kind of mention that about ourselves as well. again, this is just characteristics of ADD and ADHD. It's just the iceberg image. So I just talked about weak executive functioning. You see that's maybe one reason why someone might be distracted or not able to stay in their seat, or impulsive, and so that's one reason. But look at all the other ones that could be motivating that. They could have just not had a good night's sleep. Maybe they're hungry, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe there is an actual developmental delay, social immaturity, a learning difficulty. So there's a lot of reasons why the behavior, again, that we see, and again, who's our key resource? Of course, the parent or guardian. They typically will know everything we need to know about that person. Not always, but oftentimes. So, we lean into them to get most of the information we can to better serve that individual. Okay, we're going to stop for a moment because I've talked so long, and I want you guys to have some time. I know your fabulous team there in San Diego, your diocesan staff, is going to put you in some breakout rooms, and I don't know if they want to advise how we're doing this, but we basically gave you 3 questions. I think each group may have a different question, and I believe you're going to have about 15 minutes to go chat about that, and then come back. And hopefully there's someone in your group that might be able to at least take some notes and report back to what your responses, your small group responses were, share with the large group.
Thank you, Charlene. Yes, we're going to place everyone in small groups. There's going to be a number before the group. So here, the three questions that the groups are going to respond to are listed in the chat box. However, depending on the group you're assigned to, you're going to be working on one specific question. And so then once we reconvene, we'll hear from everyone and we'll be able to hear different perspectives. And so just give us a quick moment. For some reason, the whole team was booted off Zoom and we lost power, but I'm glad that everything continues. So now we have to reassign everyone. So just bear with us. Maybe a little stretch break would be great. Coffee break, get a tea, and we'll be right back. It's ready?
Thank you.
Okay, perfect. We're ready to go. So you'll be getting a prompt to go into your small groups, and you can go ahead and join your group now. We'll see you in about, you said 15 minutes, Charlene?
I think so.
Okay, in 15 minutes. Great. Not yet. I don't see.
I'm back, everybody. All right, let's, I was told, I believe, that just one group had question number 1. So this is the question about the pastor stated he recently baptized a baby who had a disability. He wants to support the family, but he doesn't know how to do so. So what saith group number 1 as far as responses? Is there someone that can be a spokesperson maybe for the group, or if different ones of you would like to share, that's fine too.
This is Liz from Resurrection. We actually shared together. We had a hard time actually getting everybody together, but this is what we got together. And number 1, ask the family how we can help as a church community. The family is the best person to tell us their needs. So one way we can Zoom with them in this, this time, we can Zoom, FaceTime with the family. We can make a phone call, email. We can also send material for them to work at home, like faith formation material as videos, like you were talking about, visual learners. What else? Share our findings with those that need to know. Encourage all to embrace and accept them. So we share this, everything that we're learning with you here, we share with the catechist, with the community, because sometimes a lot of the people, why does that kid keep, yelling or running around? We sometimes don't understand their needs.
Excellent, very good. And absolutely right, the family is the key resource. So even when the pastor comes to you, you're still going to end up going back to that family or that guardian and getting more information. The more information you get, the better you can serve them. And that means the whole team, the whole parish leadership team. Does anybody else, maybe it wasn't your question, but does anybody else have any input on that they'd like to add?
Well, something that we brought out, we talked about is, first thing is even if the pastor baptized the child already, the pastor still needs to ask the family if they're open and willing to be helped. Okay, if the family is open to getting help, because there are some families, there's a lot that they don't want to discuss, and they want to be private, and we don't want to add on to whatever they're going through in the family. If they say yes, we need help, all the way, let's go help.
Yeah,
I think that's a key.
Right, and thank you. That's a good point. You don't want to assume that they want, and we don't want to be, you want to. Again, you want to help, not do harm, obviously, just what you're saying, what I'm hearing you say. And the other thing I guess I would comment about baptisms, especially for those of you who oversee baptism teams and team training, this really is a critical and typical first inroad with a family who has a child with a disability, though. So again, yes, we can get to know the family and see if they're open to, as you say, further assistance, but that assistance maybe they don't need too much earlier, they're going to need more later, more than likely, and especially by the time they're coming back to us for systematic catechesis, if there's not already in some kind of early childhood, program at your parish for the under 5-year-olds. So there is still, we don't want to not see them again until First Communion, which is sometimes sadly the case in all areas of our families. But these folks, they may need those secular resources. And they certainly, more than anything, need to know that the church is there for them when and if they need something. Because as some of the stories go in the disability community, they ended up in a place that they thought they were getting on a plane going to Paris, and guess what? They ended up in Holland. There's a story about that for the disability community that exactly describes, we thought we were going over here, right, having this pregnancy and this child, and lo and behold, we had a child with Down syndrome or autism, and autism usually doesn't get diagnosed till about 2 years old, so that might not even be evident for a while. So things can come up later. We just want to make sure we stay in communication with them, as much as possible. If you're seeing them at the parish coming and going, that we're maintaining some relationship. So when they do need something, and there is that level of denial and working through this unexpected reality or circumstance, that some of this might not hit them till a little later as well. So, and sometimes too, that grief can.
Pastors, but also all of us, is not only to offer what we can serve them with, but also kind of call and encourage them that they have something to share with us when they share their child with special needs. I think that that's something really important, especially if we're trying to create a culture where they're included. I think a lot of times there's a lot
My phone just dropped.
Yes, Charlene.
Can you hear me again?
Yes, we have you back now.
Okay, good. Okay, thanks. Yeah, it was like all of a sudden I looked down and my phone had just cut off. So I was just saying, again, for the disability community, that grief might come back along the way too for them. So just to continue to maintain that relationship. Or if it's a family you've never seen before too, that you see a family with someone with a disability, again, go up, make the inroads, introduce, etc. Just get to know the family, support them. All right, how about question number 2? I think we had 2 different groups that were looking at question number 2, okay? So there's a gathering of leaders, and they're discussing among themselves how they can make their faith communities more inclusive for disabilities, persons with disabilities and their families. So what do you think some of those shared responses may be at one of your own leadership meetings?
I don't know if my group had this question, but we answered all 3. And so our response to this one would be to read the guidelines for the celebration of persons with disability first, to see what the bishops have said as kind of a form and a guide to start the conversation. And then we were thinking about inviting like a support group for parents with kids with special disabilities to hear what they want and to have them bond over it, because if they're having issues, they can discuss it together. And then lastly, maybe just appoint a minister for kids with special needs, just to have one point of contact with the person, because it's really hard to know special needs, but if it's your like specialty in the ministry, you may be better able to help those kids.
Excellent. And the, reading documents, like you're saying, continuing to learn more detailed information, certainly key. Parents together in a room, I always joke, but seriously say I back up, because when you put parents together, the bond they have out of their shared life circumstances, even though there may be differences, is just the best. So you can really pretty much just provide opportunities for parents who have children or loved ones with disabilities to come together. Again, a community building event almost just for them, or some time, a time after Mass, a room where if you have a child with a disability, we'll meet in room B, especially when we hopefully in the near future might be able to come back to live gatherings. Or even if it is just a planned Zoom call. If you're a family, if you have a loved one with, whether it's Alzheimer's or it's cerebral palsy, you can come on this call and share and talk and meet other people that have some similar challenges, So that is hugely a good idea. Thank you. Anyone else on number 2?
I think it's also the pastor. Your pastor has to be inviting and telling the congregation that everyone's welcome. Okay, the children cry, children scream. They may not be uncomfortable. They hear the sound of the choir. It triggers them, or they're just not sitting at the spot where they've been used to sit, and that causes them irritation. So let them. There was one time, let me just share, we had a special child one time attend Mass, and the pastor was really giving his homily, and the child kept repeating, shit, shit, shit. And then suddenly it started louder. Of course, mom and dad were saying, settle down, settle down. And then after the pastor talked, the child just said, shit. So can you just see? And then father says, thank you. For, it depends on how the priest would take it. Father says, okay, thank you. You understood what I said, and maybe there's something you didn't agree with, but thank you for voicing your opinion. And that kind of diffused that tension. So again, it's still on the pastor.
Absolutely. Again, a leader sets the tone, right? And especially the pastor. So absolutely. That's a great example of someone who really was able to not react. He responded, he didn't react, but in a very pastoral way. Excellent. Anyone else on that one, or anyone want to open up number 3 for us? A catechist comes to you concerned about a student's behavior and inability to stay focused. How do you respond to your catechist?
Well, we had this question in our group, and
Okay.
I've actually had this situation happen on a couple of occasions. So the key is really to communicate with the parent. And we sat down and asked, how best does your child learn? I was blessed to have a catechist, and I liked your suggestion about finding out if there's some that have that special needs training. So I was very blessed to have somebody who could step up and help with that. We did also, this was a child that had severe, could not sit still, would go under desks and all this stuff, would be very disruptive. So we did ask if there was a family member that could join in the class, and the older sibling got along really well with that child, and it really did help to diffuse some of that under the table and all that activities. Then we also would have a special lesson plan for the child based on what her learning, what her best learning scenario was. We did also speak to the children in the class. The teacher did, and explain that this child, has some special learning needs, and that she's going to be doing some different assignments, but still following the lesson plan, and to make it inclusive. So we did have the question come up though about adults, and like an RCIA that may have some special learning disabilities or something. So and how to address that. We really didn't have any good answers for that.
That one I'll just say, and I'm not sure what the scenario was of either someone already experienced or was discussed. But one time I was teaching an adult faith formation class, and the coordinators from the parish that were kind of helping me with the technology when I got there to get the LCD set up and whatever, they were kind of like whispering to me about how there was someone in the group that had autism, which inside I was there again doing something kind of outside of my usual realm of disability lens, so to speak. So they didn't know me that way as much. And so inside I was kind of smiling. First of all, happy that there was someone with autism in this adult faith formation class at night. But the interesting thing to me in that case, and this may be a tip you can always use, especially if this is the scenario, where someone, even though they're an adult, again, that's those lack of social skills, they don't understand if there's 30 people in the room. You can't ask 10 or 20 questions because you take up all the airtime, so just the idea of sometimes you have to set, even with adults, boundaries. You may need to say to someone, of course, quietly, privately, one-on-one, so to speak, especially once you hopefully have a relationship with them and whatnot, you can ask 3 questions during this hour. So that way too, number one, they have to prioritize their 20 questions they probably have, and they may be really good questions. The young man that was in the class I was in, he knew his theology. He was asking good questions, but if you didn't give him some parameters, he wouldn't understand that there was a lot of other people that wanted to share and talk as well in the group. So sometimes it might be something like that. The other thing, going back to even younger persons and in classroom settings or retreat settings, what I say when you speak to a parent, especially to the leadership, catechist if they're comfortable, most would probably rather the leader take that kind of job as far as talking with parents. I say you want to put things in a non-confrontational way. The way I used to suggest it is, say, this is what we observed. It's not they did this wrong or they're not doing this right. It's because we tend to go that way first in our words. Again, remember the words. So it's we observed this or we're observing this. And then the other question next really is you tell them what you're observing, because I don't get defensive when someone tells me they just observed something. It's not accusatory. Or you're not, remembering their defense, they live in defense mode to help them get their kids through life 24/7, more than most. So if you give it to them that way, you want to be their ally. And then you say, knowing the answer to the question, you say, have you ever observed it, this behavior, whatever this is? Knowing if they live with them 24/7 and you see it once a week, the answer is yes, but you give them that opportunity. So they more than likely are going to say yes. And then you can say, well, how do you respond to it? Because if they already have a strategy and they're having success with it, we want to replicate it. Because the more the child sees and gets the same thing everywhere they go, guess what? The greater stride sooner they're going to have in progressing. And it could be that the parent says, we don't have any idea what to do with this either. That's when then you need to pull from your knowledge bank some strategy and suggest something, kind of, well, how about if we both try doing this in home setting or school setting? And you try it. If it doesn't work, we try plan B. We try another one, But again, it may take a little time because they're not going to pick something up as quick as someone else might, a change of a behavior. So give it some time before you decide it's not working. And again, as more as we can be consistent at both places, better for everyone. Any other comments on any of the questions from the group, different groups? If not, I'm going to move forward, and I guess you can always keep chewing on those on your own or discussing maybe in other groups you go to. If I can get us. All right. And I just put up here, until we understand that our diversity is a strength and a gift to the world, we'll never fully understand the God that created it. Okay. Another quick poll, you can use the chat box. How many children do you think live daily with sensory processing challenges? 1 in 12, 1 in 9, or 1 in 6? I see a lot of good answers coming in. This is a really big issue. The last person said, I would think it's fairly common, and she guessed C, and C is right, 1 in 6. That's what I said. This is a big issue. So many youth right now, young people and youth are really struggling with sensory processing challenges. Now, you might want to know what that is, because some of us haven't maybe even heard of this. So what is it? It's really how the brain takes in all the sensory input. We're all sensory beings. Right now, you're feeling the bottom of a chair, the back of a chair. You may feel air blowing from a fan or a heater, or you may hear a traffic if you're near a window and there's a street nearby. You may have a dog in another room if you're at home and it might bark, or if something gets knocked over. A million different, the lights above us, the lights from this computer screen, all these sensory input around us, we're experiencing all the time in the world, you know, in the mass, in church, you know, whether it's the incense or the lights, or someone coughs, or the kneelers go down and they all make noise, you know, depending on some churches where they're not as carpeted, you know, all these input that we have coming and we live with. When our brain is working efficiently and effectively, most of us, most of the time, can kind of sort out and filter what's important and focus, okay, and let all that extraneous input go. That is not the case for some individuals, okay? It absolutely isn't. Let's stop for a minute, and I put these up there because I usually say, what did you do when you were a child? What did you typically probably spend your summers doing? Now, I know life is not as simple as it was when I was young, but, you know, especially summer months. I grew up in Northeast Ohio, so this was not winter months, but summer months. We ran around in our shorts and whatever, and we played with our friends around the neighborhood or at an area park or whichever we had. And I show you this because the point, again, going back to the brain, is movement is good for the brain. And that's what a lot of us did when we were younger. We ran and played with our siblings or our friends, etc. Movement is good for the brain. Now, what's happening today in a lot of kids' lives? And this is a little hard to see, but it says there aren't any icons to click. It's a chalkboard. It's a little cartoon at the bottom. What's going on today in kids' worlds? What are they doing with their time? Anybody?
Computer.
Computer.
Phones.
Some form of a device. Phone, some kind of a device typically. So, right, they're spending more. TV, technology, electronics, video games, lying down. You know, I had someone tell me they were trying to virtual homeschool someone the other day, and the child was like on her belly on a bed, and they were like, this is not school posture. You know, you still have to kind of teach them. It's like prayer posture in a church, you know, because it changes your behavior, you know, whether you're laying on your belly on the bed, trying to do some kind of school or home-based work, versus, you know, at least sitting up in a chair or a desk, or even on a yoga ball. It doesn't have to be a hard chair, depending on what their needs are. But, you know, again, just posture does matter to some degree, and it kind of helps your brain function and think differently about the activity. So that's true. So if you have a sensory processing disorder, and I want to highlight too that the little graphic in the middle is actually Esther Garcia, who's going to present in Spanish for you. It's her son who made that little graphic for us. So again, he has autism, but yet he has some gifts, you know, so he might not be able to do some other things, but he could draw that little guy for us. And so we were able to put around there, what are some of those symptoms and characteristics you might see? Some of you, if you already know, love someone with a sensory processing disorder, and I suspect some of you do, you may have the picky eater. You may have the person that doesn't really like to cuddle or be touched or hugged. They might prefer you give a high five, at least, because you like to give people options. That's an option. You can high five me or not high five me, but I'm not touching you. but if you want, you can. You give them that choice. Anytime you give people choices, it gives them, again, lowers anxiety and gives them a sense of being in control of themselves. So those kind of things are helpful. Even, as opposed to sometimes we in our old days especially, we're used to kind of giving hugs a lot, even to our loved ones. And right now we've kind of have to be careful. But so all of these kind of things that you might see, I chew on everything. You've got the people that'll chew on their shirt collars or their t-shirts all day long. Well, that's not a really very socially appropriate behavior, but that's what you might see in a room, or setting of youth. What do you think is going to happen to that person? They're going to get teased. They may get bullied because that's not an appropriate behavior for a 10-year-old or a 20-year-old. Again, motor skills, poor fine motor. So don't ask them to write answers. Again, we talked about not reading as much. They're not going to be visual learners. They're visual learners. They're not going to be, as far as with words on reading and or writing. Those are not their strengths. So just some of those, so you get an idea of what we're talking about. What are their challenges? Now, I put this other little cartoon up, which I think is very funny anyway. But, again, what about Jesus and his gospel writers, right? Some of them, there's a lot of descriptions about some of them, in today's terms, they probably would have been labeled had a sensory processing disorder or ADHD because they couldn't stay focused, or they were, doing this and that and not on task and argumentative, whatever those kind of things that we could say today, we put all these kind of labels on. So again, kind of jokingly, but again, going back to the fact that we're all still trying to live a better life, make good choices, work on those executive function skills. So what's the solution? The solution, folks, absolutely is fidgets. If you're not familiar with fidgets yet, let me introduce you to, in a sense, your salvation. Because when someone is wiggling and jiggling and they need something, you know what adults typically do? Now, this is an adult habit you'll find. What do? We click a pen. We might be at a meeting and not even thinking about it. And while we're focusing, we're doing this. Again, it's an adult version of what someone would do, just like a nervous tick kind of thing. Or they shake their leg a lot. I know sometimes I have to ask my husband in the pew in the church, stop the leg pump because the whole pew can wiggle. So those are just kind of, you're not really thinking about it, but it just starts happening. Whether it's out of boredom or this or that, who knows? It's just a behavior. But when you give someone a squishy little ball like this, or this little, these are fidgets. They just wiggle and move and mold. It's just something small. Usually fidgets would be small, handheld, quiet generally, so that they're not disruptive. Modeling clay, just something that stretches. Some people might rather have, different people are going to have different tastes again as to what is their sensory, meets their sensory need. But I have given to people, I've had parents come to meetings with me and just put something like this on the table for the child to hold and fiddle around with while we talked. Never a problem in the meeting. They're totally content just to have this. No different in a classroom setting, or a retreat setting, or even in a church. And what do we have for the church in particular? Of course, I always kind of put this up here, but truth is, we have the original fidget, right, folks? We have the rosary. It's the original fidget. And of course, then you have the original fidget spinner, the little small, 1 decade. We should be giving these out. We should have these in classrooms for people to pick up when they come in. Back of the church, they can just be a lending basket where you just can take one, use it, and now you have to clean them a little bit more these days, of course, anyway, but just things like that can really help someone attend, that they have something to hold and manipulate. If you use them in settings, of course, even especially classroom settings, families, again, ask them if the child already has one that they use at home, if it's semi-appropriate and not large or noisy, they could bring it with them into a school or parish setting. There'd be no problem with that. As long as we are okay with it pastorally and not, are responsive and not reactive, that this meets a need for them. A few others that we always mention, and this should be, it's not in every, I would say, classroom, especially when we're back in, but even now telling parents to do this themselves in their homes, if it's a need they have. Noise canceling headphones, a small little 3-foot folding trampoline you can buy, and you can find all these things on Amazon. I know because I have. The little volcanoes or water wheels, anything like that that will, and different people again will be attracted and need different things to soothe them. This little pencil popper, the picture you're seeing there, this is ideal. Now this is made for someone who is a chewer. But if you put this on the top of a pencil, obviously it's a one-person usage, but if I was to give that to someone because I knew they had that need, how much more socially appropriate would be for that 14-year-old to be chewing on this instead of a t-shirt, you know, in a classroom with other people or at a retreat center, et cetera. You know, again, so you're kind of setting them up for having a more independent, successful life. Again, not being bullied, more socially appropriate behavior. These are called bouncy bands, if you've never seen these. And what, again, I suggest is pairs could start acquiring a few of these items, maybe have them in a lending library in your catechist workroom. So, and because based on need, you don't need all of them all the time, but there might be a time when one catechist needs this or another catechist needs this based on whoever's in their room. But these are literally just plastic tubes and a rubber bar, that kind of tight rubber band that goes across. So the child can actually be seated, but yet he's still able or she's still able to move their legs, because you've got that pressure. So what I'd say is they're able to kind of wiggle while they work, but it allows them to stay seated longer. Because the child that's out of their desk a lot, truth be told, when they grow up and they can advocate for themselves in this behavioral scenario, they will tell you they were more frustrated than we were. They knew they had a problem, but they didn't know how to resolve it. And they were very upset about the fact that they didn't know how to stay in their seat and they couldn't. And of course, they were probably getting teased. So another version of this is something called a wiggle seat. This is really just literally a kind of a blown up with air padded pillow that they sell as well, called wiggle seat. Another thing you can put on a chair, a bench, anything, where it allows someone, almost like a little part of a yoga ball. So it's the same kind of idea where they could wiggle while they work. I had one pastor tell me he was going to put them in the pews. I told him, I said, Father, I think they'd love it, you know? So, I mean, he was kind of joking, probably, maybe not. But, and another one, I don't think I have a picture up there, but weighted lap pads. Okay, weighted blankets, weighted vests, weighted lap pads have gotten very popular in recent years in the general population. But these small ones, especially for, you know, classroom type of settings or an individual person at home or at school, or even in a church, to have where he could just set it on his legs or her legs. I had one parent who told me they got a lot of looks because the father would literally sit on the child sometimes when they were out at different public events. The child was already 10 years old or so, but it's almost like he didn't know where his body started and stopped. So it wasn't until he felt pressure, and his dad would do that, so he would regain that sense of where his own body was, by just the pressure of the dad sitting on, you know, gently, but sitting on him enough to give him some sensation of pressure on his body. So that's why, again, this little weighted pad might be an option for someone that needs that. And you have to, you know, kind of, again, I always tell the rest of the community, they look like toys sometimes, but they're tools, right? They're really tools to help these people be able to navigate the world more comfortably. And then again, just another small example of some things, even just in corners of rooms. Someone talked about people crawling underneath some things. You know, I said here, what some learners need is really good for everyone. It's no harm, no foul. But, you know, the little soft stuffed animals, you know, the Jesus doll Loyola Press has. You know, people always laugh. They come in my room to just, you know, it does look a lot like early childhood. The little priest dolls you can get from We Believe. I mean, there's all these little small things that, you know, again, kind of age appropriate, based on, you know, respecting the lived years, the chronological lived years. You want to respect, you know, the dignity of the person. So these might be more for younger people. But, you know, even an older person could have a hacky sack ball or a Rubik's Cube. You know, you can adjust it up or down by the chronological age to make it make sense for them. You know, again, or it could just be a little, you know, a little pup tent in a corner of a room for younger children, where if they need a break, instead of crawling under a desk, they have a little place to go kind of hide away from the lights and the sights and the sounds for a few minutes. And then you have to invite them to come back, of course. And it's a learning experience, but for the good. Now, because I have you, I do want to go over a few things about our reality right now, but I also want to pose one more question for you just to think about on your own. Okay, post-pandemic, we never thought we'd be here this long as we are, right? When we left my office last March 16th or whatever the day was, when it almost like seemed like the world ended, right? I remember my colleague said to me, my staff member, he said, when do you think we'll be back? And I remember saying, oh, August. And he was shocked because, and I said, well, no, this is big. I think it's gonna be a while. Again, that's long since passed us by. Now here we are in 2021. So again, I say, in this opportunity of time that kind of is standing still, it's been an opportunity for people to learn how to adapt more, I think, all of us, even how we gather now and more virtually than we ever did before, which works really well, actually. But also, we've also had this time to reflect on things, I think. If some people are learning new languages, and they're doing a lot of different things with some of the time they've had. Maybe they're not driving their car for 2 hours to get to work and back and forth anymore. So again, I say, how might you imagine your ministry could be more inclusive to better accompany persons with disabilities and their families post-pandemic? Because hopefully with the vaccines coming now, it's coming, God willing, sooner than later. So we need to really try and figure out what can we do next when we get back that'll really move the needle. So I say, there's kind of three categories. I broke it down into communication, collaboration, and best practices. So we'll just kind of walk through these. First, communication with the learners, okay? We talked about a few of these strategies, but you have to be specific. You have to be specific. You have to, I recommend using fewer words, and kind of ironic as much as I've talked today, but use fewer words. Instead of saying, do you need more time to finish this assignment? Maybe we just say more time. Do you see how much easier that is for someone that doesn't process quickly or long stretches of words? If you just say more time, so the more you can, whatever you're saying, challenge yourself. How can I say that in less words? Can I say it in 5 words? Can I say it in 2 words? The less words you use for someone who has a delay, a developmental delay, better for them and better for you because they'll be able to respond. So, and clear directions, of course. Don't give them, don't tell me go down here to Wallace and turn left and then go right on First Street. Once you get to the second, third direction, I need paper and pen myself, So again, don't expect that child to be able to do much more than step 1, stop. Let them do that, assess where they are. Again, just move slowly, one piece of information or direction at a time. Don't give them all at once to them. Again, I mentioned this before, but anytime you give people options or choices, this is very helpful. So offer communication options. Again, is it writing a word? Is it drawing a picture? Is it acting it out? Is it taking your hand and bringing you to show you something? Whatever their form of communication is that's best between them, the parent, find out. I know, and I'll mention maybe later, but the one book I wrote, The Adaptive Teacher, that book in the back has what we call an information form, where you can, if you have a child with any diagnosis, you can give it to a parent and say, fill this out as completely as you can. And that information you get back is quite eye-opening and oh so helpful. So you want to use things like that as well to know how this person, what are the options that really will serve that person best. Communication with parents also. Again, you want to be their ally. State your commitment to them, your commitment to serve their child, your commitment to adapt as needed. Maybe coming, especially when we're back in person, those heavy trafficked hallways and everybody gets going in and out of classrooms, that can be extremely stressful for some students. Maybe you talk to the parents and you say, I know this, I don't want them to feel anxiety just about getting in and out of classroom. It's hard to learn when you're already, you're anxious or more anxious. Maybe you let the parent that child comes in 5 minutes after the start time, or they leave 5 minutes before the end of class. Anything that allows them to go through hallways that aren't as crowded or congested or as noisy. These little tweaks make a big difference for some people. Provide the best ways to reach you. So make sure they have a way to communicate with you, email, cell phone. If it changes, please update them. They should be able to always reach you if they need to. or want to. And I know that's a personal thing about giving out your own stuff, but you can get these Google free phones, like a lot of the teachers in public schools are using these days, where they don't give out their own number, but there's a Google free phone number you can get to use where they don't really get your own personal number, and you can look that up through Google. Obviously for privacy, I would just recommend that, and that makes sense. Now they may do the same to you, but that's okay as long as you have a way to reach each other. Advise accommodations that will be provided. So again, if you can allow the flex time of their schedule, if you can provide less work because you know they need twice as much time to do half as much work, tell them that. Anything and everything you can do. If they can wear their baseball cap in class because you know that cuts the fluorescent lights out of their eyes for them, or their sunglasses. Sure, if that will help them. Or you'll even have some provided in that sensory basket or cabinet that you're going to keep for people who have different needs. Collaboration. This one, the parish itself has a lot of resources. As you know, sometimes we get a little siloed in our different ministries. But again, even like what you're learning today, take things back, talk about it, with other people, even now, whether it's, just, a virtual staff meeting, anything that you can say that, I learned this, let's try and do this. When we update our signage on our property, instead of having a handicap sign still, maybe we just put it, a icon of the wheelchair. That's usually the universal sign for a disability spot. And more commonly, the term for parking spaces and restrooms now would be accessible. So you would say an accessible restroom or an accessible parking space instead of disabled, or like we used to say. Used to see signage that said disabled. Again, we want to move away from those words regarding the community. Deaneries, of course, deaneries are vicarious. I don't know what they call it in your area. I know you generally would have hopefully a semi-regular meeting of leadership that comes together by a region in your diocese is typical. Those are invaluable. I always saw that the ones that actively went to those meetings and were engaged in those meetings, I knew their families were served the best because they were connected to the vine, they were getting the resources and sharing them, not just getting them and not moving them the next step, So that's important. Catholic and public school districts, they have resource teachers in Catholic schools. I don't know, they're working hard right now to try and move forward with this ministry in particular, and they're doing a much better job than ever. Public school districts we know have, had been at the helm of special education for many decades, and strongly so. One thing I will tell you, and I used to do it myself, was if we had someone who had a disability or diagnosis in our faith formation program, if not the catechist directly, if they so choose to take the lead, if not, I as a leader would have happily contacted and have done it, the public school system where that boy or girl was in. So if oftentimes the kids with disabilities were more likely in the public school system, and mostly because they have the resources more than the Catholic schools can afford to have. So that's very common. We would contact that public school with the parents' permission. So you get the parents' permission, an email writing something that says you may contact my child's public school principal and or special ed teacher or life skills teacher. And they're seeing that person 5 days a week. They have probably a master's in special education, or some other physical or occupational therapy degrees. Get the permission, talk to them. They will help you in leaps and bounds serve that individual child because they know them so well. And again, then the child will have a similar pattern happening at both places. Again, everybody wins. So don't forget to tap into those resources. I always say use your resources wisely. Local, you have beyond your archdiocesan offices, of course, you have a wealth of the Catholic resources you need and need to share, whether it's prenatal diagnosis from your pro-life office, et cetera, certainly the Office of Evangelization and Catechesis, the catechetical offices. All those offices are feeding you a lot of things. Don't lose sight also of local services that are, again, the Down Syndrome Association, and either local chapters you'll have, the Autism Society of America is a big one, so these national organizations. I mean, obviously, NCPD, the National Catholic Partnership on Disability, is your national Catholic organization, and we are really the only national Catholic organization that focuses on this ministry all the time. So it's our full-time job to help you, to assist you. That's why the bishops literally called us into existence in 1982. So, you know, but then you've got all the other national, the youth office, and, you know, they work with us and they do webinars on this topic too, et cetera, if you work with the older persons, learners. But then again, like I said, don't forget all those national organizations. I think at the end, I know we will give you some websites to some of them. National Catholic Office for the Deaf, great one if you're working with anyone that's deaf and has hard of hearing. So you've got all these organizations. Again, use your resources wisely and then share those resources. Okay, real quick, a few best practices and then some tips. Again, blended learning is what it's called. So you want to present content in a variety of ways. So tactile kinesthetic, auditory, visual, those are the three main categories of learning styles. And we all use all of them, but each of us probably has a preference to one or the other, you know, auditory, visual, or tactile kinesthetic. But you want to mix it up and have people using all of them in some forms and fashions throughout your teaching. Of course, assess progress. Is it working? If it's not, then, you know, we adjust, right? Provide feedback. Let the catechist know, let the learner know, you know, what's working, not working. So, you know, be very transparent, and the families. And of course, most of all, the goal is, you know, again, we call them object lessons, but engage the learner. You know, storytelling is great, you know, passing around a crucifix when, you know, it's their opportunity to say a prayer for someone, that they have something to hold while they do that. It's something tangible, is, again, the tactile kinesthetic, that you're engaging them. And, you know, offering a prayer. So it's not just you praying, it's everyone saying a prayer. So these tips on this page really are just the hallmarks of what's called universal design for learners. So if you've ever gone on a campus and you walked around and you said, my gosh, a wheelchair, someone in a wheelchair could absolutely access this whole campus. There's no steps, not even one anywhere. It's just flat and planned appropriately, all, you know, ramp to the altar. Everything's accessible. Someone wants to lector or be in the choir, they can access it without a step. That's universal design as far as architectural goes, but it also, you know, we think that way too for when we want to serve all learners. A few tips for virtual learning. Okay, so like we did today in the small breakouts, instead of 30 people, you're going to go into smaller groups. So either live or virtual, it's either one. Smaller groups are always going to be better for this community. If you can project whatever on a screen instead of on a small device up onto a large screen, even families in their home, I hope they do the same. I mean, I put the Mass on when I'm streaming the Mass. I put it on my large TV. I don't watch it on the small one. You know, so that too helps. It's easier to see. Of course, using animations, transitions, and PowerPoint slides gives it a little more engagement and liveliness than just being flat, screen after screen, flipping, kind of old school. Engage all five senses. And I always say shoot for engaging all five senses, because if you plan to engage all five senses, you'll probably typically get 3 and sometimes 4. And once in a while, a home run, and you'll get all 5 involved, right? So think about it, you know, what you see, what you hear, what you touch. I'm going to get back here. Hearing, sight, touch, smell, and taste. So those are the 5. Of course, you know, taste and smell are sometimes the more challenging ones, but not always, because sometimes, you know, again, we have our incense. You know, we could have a scented candle. We could have a scented tea bag, just a tea bag that could be in that sensory kit. Someone just might want to smell a scented candle or a scented tea bag. That might appeal to them, to be able to focus while they work, just to have that. So senses are still important. And when we have, you know, a snack or a celebration, you know, you have the popcorn or the different things that also have a good aroma. What else we have? Employ 3-dimensional items, like I said. You want to use things that, you know, really have some movement to them. This is just another thing that sits on my desk, kind of like a fidget. It's nice and quiet. But, you know, 3-dimensional items. And of course, encourage presenter view versus gallery view. So it's better to see one person's face than 20 faces for some of our learners. A few more. Blended learning, again, technology and hands-on materials are helpful. Someone mentioned earlier, sending out materials in advance or providing times for people to drive by and pick them up in this current climate. You know, that could be another option. So you might have to, you know, a little more intentionality in prepping things. but so that they can be engaged on that Zoom call. Offer shorter segments, so we might be only meeting for 30 minutes versus an hour and 15 like we used to. If that's more manageable, cut that time down or allow shorter for some. Music and movement, again, I can't say enough, good for the brain, okay? Music and movement, I would say have it in every level, have as much as you can. I think it's very easy to tap our toes, all of us often. Be attentive to the time constraints and stress levels, especially on the parents, and especially, currently right now, because they're trying to work from home and be homeschooling parents that many of them were not before. Some were, but some were not. There's just a lot, plus let alone loss of jobs, loss of loved ones, loss of income, loss of on and on. It's a tough time. So just be so attentive to time commitments and stress levels. It's okay if not everything gets done as much as we might have liked it done a year ago right now. Provide ways for parents to connect with you. I mentioned that earlier, of course. On our website, if you haven't already been there, I certainly hope you will check it out, ncpd.org. But we do have under the catechetical tab on our homepage, our council. We have a council on intellectual and developmental disabilities, and we have a council on mental illness. Council on Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities has been working for the last almost a whole year now. So for every month, they put out some adapted faith formation activities. It can be used by a catechist as well, but they're kind of geared more really right now because of the climate for families to do some catechetical activities based on, there's a different theme every month. I think the one coming out on February 1st is going to be about Ash Wednesday. So every month it's got a different theme, and they're all archived there. And they're basically evergreen. So we're just going to leave them there after they make the whole year. I think they started last April or May. And so you can always look for those and get those out to your folks in advance, okay, to your catechist or to your families. And I'm going to close today with, if you've never heard of this book, and this is, I haven't ordered a copy, but Adam, God's Beloved. It was actually the last book that was written by Henry Nouwen before he died. So we know Henry Nouwen was an internationally known scripture scholar, theologian, presenter, professor extraordinaire, highly sought out, speaker. Well, an author. So before he died, his last choice in his life was to go serve at a large community. And in the large community, he, Henry, served on a team of many other adults, because a large community is people without disabilities living with people with disabilities, is how it was designed and still is maintained. So he chose to live there and served on this team to care for Adam, who had multiple and severe disabilities. That's a picture of him and Adam, obviously. Many of his professor friends, I'll say, theologian friends, would occasionally come to visit him, he would tell in the book. And they would ask him, in essence, why are you wasting your time here? Everybody wants you out, out in the world, doing what you've always been known to do best. And he said at some point he realized he didn't want to try and defend why he was there. He just realized where his friends were, and he let them stay there, where they were. But he had kind of moved to this different place in his life, literally and figuratively, right? So he said, and I tell you this because so often in catechesis, we are asked, how do we know? How do we know someone understands that it's Jesus and in the host versus regular bread? How do we know that they understand or they'll ever learn the Our Father? Any of the things that are our Catholic content, right? And what Henry says in the book, paraphrasing, but beautifully and simply, he says, those are our questions from below. What he said we need to do is switch it around and think about what God's questions from above are. And God's questions from above are, can you see my face in Adam? Can you let Adam lead you in prayer? I love that, folks. I mean, to me, that says what I say in a not nearly as beautiful way. It's not a joyful experience for everybody involved. from the learner to the catechist, to the catechetical leader, to the diocesan leader, to the parent, to the pastor, we're doing something wrong. You know, we have to change. You know, we change for them. And like I said earlier, we need them more than they need us, right? Tomorrow, because I think we're almost out of time, we're going to discuss some, especially the section that relates a lot to the disability ministry out of the new directory for catechesis. We're going to talk about some of your questions and concerns, I'm sure, about sacramental preparations and celebrations. How do we do that better? And we're also going to definitely touch on mental health, because that's such a big need right now too in our world, no different in our church communities. So that's what I have kind of in my back pocket coming for tomorrow. I think we may have just a few minutes. Does anybody have any question, burning desire they'd like to share now? And again, thank you for your patience and listening so much to me today.
Thank you so much, Charlene. At this time, yes, if you have any questions, you can unmute or you can use the chat. Okay, sounds like no one has any burning questions today. Charlene, we want to thank you because this has been such a wonderful resource and tools and activities that you're giving us, you know, for the betterment of our ministry. So thank you for this wonderful time. This is just part one. So we have part two tomorrow. And of course, if you have any catechist friends or parents that might be interested in joining us, we also have a segment this evening in Spanish from 6:30 to 8:30. Just contact our office. You can contact Lupita and we will get them all registered and ready to go. If there are no other questions or comments, then just, of course, lots of thank yous, and everybody's very pleased, and so are we, Charlene, so thank you. We will see you tomorrow at 10, and perhaps we can end our session in prayer.
I believe.
Thank you, Charlene.
Did you want to lead a prayer, or would you like me to?
Okay, I can lead it if you like. Spirit. Amen. Lord Jesus, we give you thanks for this wonderful day of resources. We ask that you continue to bless Charlene and her ministry and all that she's doing through the NCPD and all the entire community. We ask that you continue to bless us, to guide us, and to give us the strength and fortitude to continue to be those beacons of light and hope for our families and our students and adults that we minister to with special needs. And particularly, we ask for the people who are in these moments suffering of loneliness, and of course that are suffering from mental illness. As we prepare for tomorrow's workshop, we ask that you continue to guide us and bless us as together we will end. Glory be to the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and never shall be, world without end. Amen. Amen. Thank you all once again. We will see you tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. sharp. Don't be late, and we wish you a wonderful rest of your day. God bless everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Tomorrow.
It's wonderful.